So in the last video, we looked at several sources detailing Ricimer's actions, and we found out to our surprise that most of the times we weren't able to prove that Ricimer really was responsible for all these evil actions that we normally hold against him. So let us then move on to the next evil deed that Ricimer did, namely the sack of Rome in 472 AD. One of the most unknown sacks of Roman history, about which I made a video, by the way, that you can watch right here. John Manalas wrote about that sack, quote, "Ricimer, the patrician of the West, rebelled against Anthemius, the emperor of the West, and besieged the city of Rome. After a battle lasting 5 months, Ricimer took the city, killed the emperor Anthemius, and plundered Rome, causing great destruction. He appointed Olybrius as emperor in his place. Ricimer died shortly afterward of a hemorrhage." End quote. Marcellinus Comes wrote, quote, "Anthemius, emperor of the West, was killed by his son-in-law Ricimer in a civil war after a reign of 5 years. Ricimer, having killed Anthemius, set up Olybrius as emperor and plundered the city of Rome. Ricimer died on the 42nd day after Anthemius' death." End quote. John of Antioch wrote, "Ricimer, having grown hostile to Anthemius, raised an army and besieged Rome. After a long siege, he entered the city, killed Anthemius, and plundered much of Rome. He then made Olybrius emperor. Ricimer died soon after of a hemorrhage, having ruled through puppet emperors for many years." End quote. Cassiodorus wrote, quote, "Anthemius was killed by Ricimer in the 5th year of his reign. Ricimer set up Olybrius as emperor and plundered the city of Rome. Ricimer died of a hemorrhage shortly after." End quote. Jordanus wrote, "Ricimer, fighting against Anthemius, killed him in Rome and caused much devastation. He then made Olybrius emperor, but Ricimer himself died soon after of a disease." End quote. Sidonius Apollinaris, meanwhile, mentions the growing tension between Ricimer and Anthemius, but is silent on the sacking of Rome itself. So here we have multiple mentions of a long siege of Rome, of plundering, and of devastation caused by the plundering of Rome by Ricimer's Germanic soldiers. Now this is where most of us immediately see a clear confirmation of Ricimer's absolute evil. After all, how could a Roman do this to a Roman city and his fellow Romans? Now let us look at some other examples of as what we would normally describe as well-regarded Romans who did exactly that to Roman cities and to their inhabitants. Let's start with Diocletian's sack of Alexandria in 298 AD. Here is what some ancient authors wrote on the siege. Eutropius wrote, quote, "Diocletian besieged Alexandria for 8 months, where he killed Achilleus, the author of the rebellion, along with many others, and polluted the city with slaughter and plundering." End quote. Aurelius Victor wrote, quote, "Diocletian took Alexandria after a long siege, and having captured it, he punished the rebels severely, plundering the city and killing many of its inhabitants." End quote. Chronicon Paschale wrote, quote, "Diocletian, after a siege of 8 months, captured Alexandria, killed Achilleus, and plundered the city, causing great slaughter." End quote. Very interesting, isn't it? A long siege, brutal destruction, and great slaughter. But despite that, Diocletian is regarded as a good emperor. Or what about Septimius Severus' sack of Byzantium in 195 AD? We can read at Cassius Dio, quote, "Septimius Severus took Byzantium after a long siege, and having captured it, he killed many of its inhabitants, destroyed its walls, and reduced it to the status of a village, giving its territory to Perinthus. He plundered the city thoroughly and punished its people severely for supporting Pescennius Niger." End quote. Herodian wrote, "Severus, enraged by Byzantium's loyalty to Niger, ordered the city to be sacked. The walls were torn down, the inhabitants were massacred or enslaved, and the city was stripped of its status, becoming a mere village under Perinthus' control." End quote. In the Historia Augusta we can read, quote, "Severus captured Byzantium after a siege of 2 years, plundered it, killed many of its people, and demolished its fortifications, leaving it a shadow of its former self." End quote. Now, even though this latter document is normally only semi-reliable, this corroborates very well with the other sources. They all write that Byzantium was besieged for a long time, that many inhabitants were killed, and that the city was heavily damaged. There are many more such examples, of course, but I think you get the point. Anthemius was a rival from Ricimer's point of view. This was a civil war. Ricimer saw Anthemius as an Eastern Roman intruder, a Greek intruder installed by the Eastern Roman Empire to undermine his power, and Rome had sided with Anthemius over Ricimer. After a long siege and many of his men dying in the siege, it is unfortunately understandable that his men were angry after taking the city that had sided with Anthemius, his enemy. If we are honest to ourselves, where is the difference to Diocletian's sack of Alexandria or to Septimius Severus' sack of Byzantium? In the siege of Rome, Ricimer had the Emperor Anthemius then killed by Gundobad. However, even here, where is the difference to earlier Roman times, where emperors had their rival emperors killed, or when the Praetorian Guard routinely killed emperors with whom they were not content? If you are a fan of Roman history and you would want to buy an item for yourself or someone else as a present, then you might want to consider the SPQR Shop. They produce incredible replicas of Roman history with a very high attention to detail. All their items are carefully handcrafted, and I think it will be difficult to find that level of craftsmanship anywhere else. They handcraft Roman coin replicas, rings, pendants, attributes, and many other items of Roman history. If you want to support the channel, or if you want to buy a present for someone who likes Roman history, please go and check out their excellent site, link in the description. If you buy over this link, you will receive a 20% price reduction, which I personally find very generous. Thank you very much for your consideration, and back to the video. So let us then recap all that we learned about Ricimer in this video and the last one. Ricimer had Majorian killed, yes, but there is no mention of a 5-day-long torture. This is a pure Wikipedia invention, as so often. Killing a political rival in Roman times was basically a normal standard procedure, unfortunately. It was, unfortunately, the most Roman thing ever. We also cannot confirm that Ricimer really had Livius Severus poisoned. Only one source says this, and this could be propaganda. The same goes for the supposed killing of Marcellinus of Dalmatia. Only one source says this, and it's the one that is furthest removed time-wise from the events. Here too, therefore, we cannot confirm this with high reliability. However, we can confirm that Ricimer besieged Rome for 5 months and that there was a subsequent sack and plundering of the city and great destruction. And we can also confirm that Ricimer had Anthemius killed. So we only know for sure that 1. Ricimer had Majorian deposed and executed. 2. He got into a civil war with Anthemius, besieged and sacked Rome, his army plundered the city causing great devastation, and he had his political rival Anthemius executed. And we also know that he defended Italy against the Vandals in 456 and against the Alemanni in 466, winning several major victories for Rome. So now, knowing all this, I will do something crazy. I have to confess, I feel a bit crazy doing this, but I will try to portray Ricimer's side of the story, or at least what I imagine Ricimer might have thought and what Ricimer's motivations might have been. My aim is not to show that Ricimer was actually a super friendly guy. I kind of doubt it, but to show that history is very often, especially late Roman history, where propaganda and biases are super strong and the sources are very rare and few, that it is strongly dependent on how you interpret the sources. And you can interpret the rare and often biased sources in multiple different ways. So here we go. This is how things might have looked from Ricimer's perspective. Ricimer, after Aetius and Valentinian's murders, realizes that the Roman Empire is crumbling. The Germanics are advancing on all sides. He thinks that this is an unwinnable situation and that in order to keep the Roman Empire alive, the Roman army must consolidate its rule in Italy for at least 10 years, better 20, before attempting any risky counter-offensives outside of Italy. His plan is to use his Visigothic and Suevi lineage in order to secure strong alliances with the Germanic nations and thus to keep the barbarians at bay. In 456 then, he defeats the Vandals, his arch enemies, at 2 major battles, thus saving Italy from this ruthless Germanic tribe. As a consequence, the Western Roman Emperor Avitus makes him Magister Militum, master of the soldiers, the highest general in the West. However, Remistus, the other Magister Militum, is in his way. And Avitus, after all, the Western Emperor, is hated by virtually all Roman senators as a Visigothic outsider. So he sees his chance come to overthrow those two, Avitus and Remistus, together with his old friend Majorian. This goal is achieved in 457 and Ricimer now has unopposed military power over Italy. His Germanic heritage, though, makes it impossible for him to directly reign, and so an alliance with Majorian as emperor makes sense. He hopes that Majorian will agree to defend Italy for the time being and will agree to consolidate Roman rule in Italy before attempting to restore the empire. But Ricimer is shocked to find out that Majorian already very early in his reign has plans to restore the Western Roman Empire. So Majorian recruits a barbarian army in 458 and set out on his campaign. Ricimer strongly advises against this, telling his old friend that this would be a dangerous undertaking. Should his military expedition fail, the Western Roman Empire would be utterly doomed. But Majorian wouldn't listen. Ricimer is at first surprised at how well everything went. Victory after victory, impressive. But then the year 460 comes and the entire Western fleet is destroyed near Carthago Nova. 300 ships that the Western Empire had built, thus emptying its treasury, and destroyed by the Vandals no less. The Vandals! The same ones that he had defeated just 4 years earlier. And here, Majorian humiliates the empire against his arch-nemesis, the Vandals of all. Dissenting voices against Majorian grew louder and louder. Many senators at Rome now spoke openly against the emperor. They sought Ricimer's alliance against Majorian. What else would the emperor do? Majorian's reforms were already very detrimental to the senators, but now this humiliating defeat against the Vandals? And the state finances now utterly ruined as well? The last vestiges of chances that the West still had burned together with the 300 ships in Majorian's campaign. The senators urged Ricimer to get rid of Majorian. Ricimer was certainly not fond of this outcome, but he had warned his old friend. He had warned him that a failure would be disastrous. No, he had to stop Majorian before he would lose more of the empire's thinly stretched resources in more military disasters. He had the backing of the majority of the Senate of Rome after all, and so he intercepted the emperor at Dertona in August of 461 and had Majorian executed shortly thereafter. He really was not happy with this outcome, but it had to be done. Majorian's grand visions were too dangerous. The empire couldn't risk another such giant disaster. Now, he would need an emperor on the Western throne that would politically align with his views. Livius Severus might be a good choice. And for a few years after, indeed, it looked like Roman rule consolidated in Italy for a few years. But tragically, Severus died in 465 from natural causes. Meanwhile, Ricimer had to defend Italy against an Alemanni invasion in 466, so that finding a new emperor was not a very high priority. In 467, the Eastern Emperor Leo then sent Anthemius. What, now an Easterner who would be installed on the throne? An Eastern Roman outsider? All I'm trying to do is to consolidate power in Italy. And first Maiorian goes on a rampage, the second emperor dies too early, and now foreign powers are meddling. Perfect, Ricimer thought. Well, then let's try to at least be diplomatic and see how things would go. So Ricimer married the daughter of Anthemius, Alypia, in 467. But unfortunately, Alypia bore no children. This made Ricimer very unhappy. The alliance between Ricimer and Anthemius was thus already on very shaky ground. And then in 470, Anthemius had executed Romanus, Ricimer's friend and supporter, on charges of treason. And then there were even rumors that Anthemius was a secret pagan who plotted to restore the old pagan cults at Rome. But more, Anthemius had lost a sizable army in his war against the Visigoths near Arelate. And then came the mega disaster. In 468 at Cape Bon, a huge eastern fleet and additional western resources were utterly destroyed by the Vandals. Again the Vandals. This was too much, Ricimer thought. Can't they see that all that they do is to hasten the fall of the Western Roman Empire with all these giant naval disasters? He had to stop this eastern intruder before he could do more harm. And so he prepared his army and marched for Rome. After a long and brutal siege of 5 months, his men were tired and angry. Many of his men had died. And then finally they had managed to storm the city, but restraining his men after this ordeal was basically impossible. He told his men that they could plunder the city because, after all, there was not much left in the state treasury. It was emptied from all these military disasters. So how could he even pay his soldiers? He was not fond of this outcome, but plunder was the only way to pay them. And Anthemius he would have to execute. He was too dangerous to be left alive, another Maiorian with his grand visions to restore the empire and then risking huge defeats. And had he not learned from the lessons of Valentinian III and Honorius that letting the emperor live could turn out very badly for the Magister Militum? No, Anthemius had to go as well. He never wanted this, but he would do what was necessary for defending Italy. He never wanted to have Romans suffer, but many of them in Rome did side with Anthemius. And had Diocletian and Septimius Severus not done the same to their enemies? So now he sought to install a new emperor, finally one who maybe would see reason and who would share his vision of consolidating power in Italy. Why wouldn't they understand that the days of the old empire were gone? All they would risk would be huge military defeats. It seemed to him that he was the only one who was seeing reason. Maybe things would go better with this Olybrius. But then he started feeling bad, worse and worse, and not long later, Ricimer was dead on August 19th, 472. Thus died Ricimer, a figure so universally hated that this whole passage seemed almost like a parody. However, let's keep in mind that even though I am of course playing devil's advocate here, it is not entirely unrealistic to assume that this passage from before might be true to at least a certain extent. We will, after all, never know what really happened and what Ricimer was really thinking and what his true motivations were. Historical sources, especially the Eastern Roman ones, blame him for everything. Due to his Arian faith and due to his barbarian heritage, he was really hated by many, and so there was of course a lot of bias against him. And what easier way to blame all the failures of the Western Roman Empire on the evil Arian barbarian? So what was really real and what was political propaganda is now, such a long time later, impossible to tell. And even though my pro-Ricimer account is not necessarily the most likely thing that was really going on, still we cannot exclude it with 100% certainty. The point of this video is not to show that Ricimer was a super friendly guy or a misunderstood hero, but that interpreting what happened long ago is super difficult. We saw how difficult it is to reconstruct what really happened, and the sources are, as we saw, very few and often very biased, and even more, oftentimes contradicting. Therefore, it is of course possible to see Ricimer as the evil villain who accelerated the fall of the West, but it is also possible to interpret Ricimer as an ambitious general who had differing opinions from many of his contemporary generals and emperors, who thought that consolidating power in Italy was the best course of action in order to prolong the life of the West, and who, due to his Germanic heritage, couldn't become emperor. So then, was he a friendly guy or a complete psychopath? Well, this depends on your own personal bias. The sources we saw are incomplete, often contradicting and biased, and so your own interpretations of if Ricimer was super evil or just a standard ambitious general is up to your own interpretation. I personally think that it's very likely that he was at least extremely ruthless. But since there could be a lot of later Eastern Roman propaganda in how Ricimer was portrayed, it's just super difficult, if not impossible, to 100% prove that Ricimer was really this super evil Germanic infiltrator who wanted to take down the Roman Empire from within. Now, my own personal bias inclines me to believe that he was an a-hole in real life. But can I prove it? No, I can't say for sure. And so your interpretation of this fascinating historical character might be as valid as mine. That, dear friends of late Roman history, is the beauty of this fascinating era, the last decades of the Western Roman Empire. If you like this video, please consider supporting this channel via Patreon, because it is your support which makes this channel possible. You would have my utmost gratitude. And of course, I want to thank everybody who supports Maiorianus. You people are amazing. And if you want to learn more about Ricimer's sack of Rome in 472, you can watch this video in the upper right corner. But if you want to learn more about Anthemius, you can watch the other video in the lower right corner. I say thanks again to all friends of Roman history, gratias tibiago and bene vadete.